Thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone. Very excited to be here in this very hot and humid city. I'm from Hong Kong, but coming to Vietnam is like next level in terms of turning up the heat here. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is about our fund, which is a Polkadot ecosystem fund. And I'm going to try to make it as relevant as possible for you guys here. And so I'm primarily going to talk about accessing funding, right? Which I think, here in Vietnam, there are lots of really good builders here, really good communities, projects building, either already in Polkadot or in different ecosystems who are maybe considering to move over to Polkadot. And usually, like, the first question that I always get is like, oh, how do I access funding? Like, how can I get money to build out, to pay my team, to keep the lights on, to keep the operations going? So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about this and how we at Harbor Industrial Capital can potentially support you in doing that. I haven't really prepared any slides, so I'm just going to be rambling on. I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible. We've got about 20 minutes for this session here. And so if there are any questions, just raise your hands. I'll take questions throughout the presentation and then at the end as well, if there's some Q&A. All right. So let's maybe kick it off with a bit of background, who we are, why we are running this ecosystem fund for Polkadot, how we got started. So me and my co-founder here, Mario, we're based in Hong Kong. We come from like a traditional investment banking background. I used to work at Morgan Stanley. He was at Bank of China. And then about 3 years ago, we got together with the idea of doing something for Polkadot. Reason for that is, I've been in the crypto space for a long time, all in Hong Kong. Gavin Wood came to Hong Kong for the initial fundraise, as you might remember. He raised a lot of money from Hong Kong, from China, so I was part of that. And I was really excited about Polkadot because that was during the time that Ethereum was running into all kind of like scaling issues. It didn't really seem to scale the way it should if you really want to get to mass adoption. And then Polkadot came along, and I was really excited about it right from the beginning. And I was like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. Gavin, as you know, left Ethereum to start his own project to get to the next level of scaling. And I think in that sense, Polkadot has been ahead of Ethereum for a very long time. So what we then did with our fund is, well, back then it wasn't a fund, right? It was just us who held some DOT, who liked the Polkadot ecosystem. And so we decided to pull that money together and invite a few other people who were also in the Polkadot space to join the fund, pull their resources together. So we set up as a Cayman GPLP structure and set up the fund, started raising from family offices primarily. So people always ask us do we get funding from the Web3 Foundation or from Parity? The answer is no. We're a purely private fund, and I think this is quite important to emphasize, because as a private fund, you're really just accountable to your own LPs and not to the foundation. So you have a different investment mandate. But right from the beginning, we decided to focus on Polkadot only. Why? Well, simply because we like the technology. That's the first reason. And because we like the community and the people who are building on it. And so I think it is quite important to have this ecosystem idea, right? I'm the first one to admit that at the moment, Polkadot is not the sexiest blockchain out there. There are other ecosystems where there's more attention by VCs who are pouring more money into it. But purely on a fundamental perspective, on a fundamental level, I think Polkadot is the most exciting place where you can be and where you can deploy money. What I also would quite like to say is Polkadot is probably the contrarian trade of this cycle, right? When you go to crypto conferences, tomorrow we'll all be at GM Vietnam. And you say you're working for Polkadot or you're building on Polkadot, they always go like, oh, why Polkadot? Isn't Polkadot dead already, right? Let me reassure you, it's not that. Polkadot is, probably the most contrarian trade. So you get an amazing value proposition when going in it now, because purely from a fundamentals level, it is, in terms of its technology, it's second to none. And I will talk a little bit more about the technology in a bit, but first let's stay a little bit more on the funding side and on the fundraising side. I'll talk a bit more about our fund, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how you guys who are builders and developers can potentially access funding here. So, our fund. We raised about $10 million. It's all about sort of private LPs, as I said, so family offices. We got a lot of Web2 guys, right, who invested in our fund, or even traditional industries. So think of shipping, real estate, manufacturing, right? They want to get access to the Web3 ecosystem, and then our fund is an easy way to channel capital into Web3, specifically into Polkadot. And so this first fund is now closed. We're fully raised. The number one deployment strategy of Fund 1 was Parachain auctions, right? So this is a pretty unique model for Polkadot, which I think was the right thing at the right time, right? When Parachain auctions rolled out in 21. It's like a way of deploying resources. That's really what a Parachain auction is. You say, okay, there's a project, we want access to block space. How are we going to get that? How are we going to have a secure, predictable market for block space? That's where these Parachain auctions came about. And that's what we very heavily did, right? So we made those deals with projects whereby we said, okay, we get a slot, and in exchange we get some tokens. I see InfoArch here, that's one example, right? Shout out, one of our portfolio companies. That's kind of the deals that we did do with them, helping them access the block space, right, in exchange for the native tokens. So I think this was a pretty good model for a long time, but it's also running into its limitations. And that's why it's getting changed, right? And so I want to talk about this a little bit here as well. So what are the limitations? The problem of this Parachain auction module is that while you have a very reliable access to block space, it's not a very flexible model, right? Because you have to first win a Parachain auction in order to get the access to it. And that is a barrier to entry, right? It can still be cheap, you can still work with VCs like ourselves, but it's still a barrier to entry, right? And that's not great. I mean, last year, Gavin Wood, the founder of Polkadot, he gave this presentation in Copenhagen, where he was talking about the tinkerers, right? A tinkerer who is just out there building things, building cool stuff, and they just want to quickly deploy. And doing a Parachain auction first is not a great way of accessing the Polkadot ecosystem. And so that's quite unfortunate, right? And it was a barrier to entry. That's why it's getting changed, right? So I'm quite happy to share here with everyone that the next iteration of the block space allocation model on Polkadot is getting rolled out in the name of Agile Coretime. So what is that, right? Agile Coretime is essentially what replaces these auctions, and it's a way of guaranteeing, well, not guaranteeing, but of accessing block space on this much more agile module. So, okay, you're starting a game, you're starting a DeFi application, anything, an NFT collection, whatever it is, right? And maybe at the beginning you have 3 users, right? And with Agile Coretime, you can do that, right? You can be part of the Polkadot ecosystem, but without overpaying for it, right? And And it's very cheap, right? You can launch super quickly, you can deploy, you can go to market. And from day one, you have the full interoperability throughout the Polkadot ecosystem, interoperability into other ecosystems through bridges, and we have like a new generation of bridges coming up now on Polkadot, which are completely trustless, secure, so like these bridge hacks that we had in the past won't be an issue anymore. And so you're starting small, and then over time, as you're scaling up, you still have the ability to access the block space without like, you know, having to meet certain thresholds. So you scale, great, you pay more, but you still have a predictable model whereby you know how much it's going to cost, right? On Ethereum, you always have these gas fee spikes, right? I'm sure like people in the room have done this, right? Like there's an Ethereum ICO or something, and then everyone wants to get into this one ICO, and suddenly like Ethereum gas fees are $1,000, literally $1,000, which is ridiculous. So you're not going to have this issue on Polkadot with Coretime, with elastic scaling. So that's like, you know, in my opinion, one of the killer use cases here: scaling, security, and interoperability. All right, let's talk a little bit more about funding, right? Different avenues for funding, both VC and foundation, and what we are doing to essentially enable that, right? So we're currently at the stage where we fully raised our fund one, and yeah, as I said, like roughly 10 million that we have raised from private LPs. We're about 3/4 deployed. So if somebody of you is looking for funding, you know, welcome to talk to us. We are still deploying out of fund one, but we're kind of getting to the limits of it, right? We're like kind of fully deployed. So that's why now we have started with our second fund. Second fund has a target size of $100 million, and it's going to be like a pure Polkadot ecosystem fund, right? So it's not fully raised yet. So if you come to me and want to have some money from this fund, it's not going to happen because we haven't raised it yet. But we're in the middle of doing exactly that. And we already received a lot of interest for it as well, right? Our strategy is still to do, to get like sort of old money, if you want, into the Polkadot ecosystem. I'm not a believer in like recycling all this capital that is already here. I mean, that's what, when you look like at some other VC funds, right, it's like this, you know, things are going in circles essentially, where money that is already there just gets deployed into this fund, and then this fund deploys into that fund, and you know, it's kind of a very circular economy. What we are trying to do here really is to get new capital into the ecosystem and then go directly into Polkadot, right? So positioning Polkadot as the gateway to Web3. And I think this strategy really resonates with like some of those traditional investors, those family offices, those institutional investors. And with this new fund, we're going to have like multiple different deployment strategies, right? And it's roughly like 4 or 5 different strategies. So let me quickly run through them. And the reason why I'm running through this is because, you know, I think in this room we have a lot of builders, people who are already having projects, people who might look for more liquidity into their project. And with this new large ecosystem fund, there are a lot of things that we can do and that I'm quite happy to, you know, share with you guys here. So the number one strategy is still going to be seed round funding for Polkadot-based projects, right? So that means like if you're building something cool, something something on Polkadot, come talk to us, right? We're often going to be like the first ones to write the check. We're not afraid of that. Oftentimes we have been like the first VC funds to write a check. We're also pretty good at syndicating deals, right? So if you come to us and you're asking for, I don't know, $1 million, maybe we don't have $1 million, but we do, you know, a third of that or a quarter of that, and then we syndicate it out to some of our VC partners. We usually manage to pull together like a nice check to get you off the ground, to bootstrap the project. So this is something we're gonna do much more in the future. And yeah, with this new ecosystem fund, we obviously have like we're gonna have much more firing power. The second thing that we're gonna do here is safes. So this is something that, in my opinion, is also still missing quite dearly in the Polkadot ecosystem, also in other ecosystems. But safe is like the simple agreement for future equity. And the reason why I say this is so important, and I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, is because not every project has to issue their own tokens, right? You get a lot of like misalignment of incentives if you're essentially forcing every project into issuing their own token, because you don't need it, right? Like there are so many use cases where you don't need your own token, but then these projects still get forced into it, right? And it's unfortunate, right? Because yeah, it skews incentives. The much more logically, the much more obvious way of doing this is to give up some equity, right? And then like have the VC participate in the future cash flows of the business. Especially with Agile Coretime, right? Where we're moving to on Polkadot. I think this is really something important, right? Allowing builders to just focus on building an amazing product, not worry about tokenomics, but just like, you know, running any kind of business that generates cash flow. Maybe using DOT as the native token. I think this is something that we really wanna push as well, right? Projects, yeah, just use DOT as your payment token, or use USDC, totally fine. Or use anything else. Use like Bitcoin, right? Perfectly reasonable as well. But don't issue your own token. We can support you in terms of funding through a safe agreement, right? So I think this is something that's missing, and this is something that we want to do more of. Okay, what other models of deployment do we have? We're gonna have like a liquid strategy, which is something that a lot of VC funds are shying away from, which I also find unfortunate, because especially in Polkadot right now, there are a lot of undervalued projects, right? Good projects, you know, solid team, good, you know, product, but because the market isn't where it should be, and Polkadot, as I said before, isn't as sexy as it should be, right? Prices have been going down, and you know, they're listed, they're trading on Binance, wherever, but they're just like below their, you know, their real value, where they should be, based on the users and based on the activity that is happening on chain. So this is going to be one of our strategies as well, right? To either buy those tokens directly on an exchange, right? Which obviously benefits them. Market cap is going up. Or, and that's why I'm mentioning it here in this context as well, we can do OTC deals, right? Where we just say, okay, foundation needs more capital. Great, they have some tokens. They don't want to like impact the market price, but they need more funding because they want to extend their runway. So you guys can come to us, and we can do like an OTC deal where we, like, based on the current valuation, you know, we don't even need a discount. We can just like take the direct like market price on an exchange as a reference rate and do an OTC deal. So these are also things that we can do with this new fund. And then the fourth thing, and afterwards I'm gonna shut up and open it up for questions, is bringing new successful existing projects with a large user base to Polkadot, okay? This is something that I think is also extremely important. I can give you one good example. Who's here familiar with like the Sidetail Mythical deal that happened recently? Anyone's familiar with that? So Mythical Games is like a very successful gaming project. John Linton, the founder, is one of the core developers of Call of Duty. So really very OG game, very solid team based out of America, right? They wanted to do, they wanted to get into Web3 for a while. They tried out like a bunch of different ecosystems. They've been building on Ethereum first, but then ran into troubles because of the high gas fees and because Ethereum just on L1 just simply doesn't scale very well. And then they tried out a couple of other L2s, but that didn't really work very well for them either. And that's what Cytail did, and Cytail is like another like Polkadot-focused fund, a VC fund, is they essentially coupled an investment into Cytail with the condition of them moving over to Polkadot. So building out the Mythos chain on Polkadot, right? Which from the perspective of Polkadot is of course extremely attractive because they bring like millions, like literally millions of users with them, right? So these are good transactions that we want to have, that we want to see, right? Like this is what drives adoption. And oh, this is actually much better without this loud fan. And yeah, so this is something that we want to see much more of, right? So with our new ecosystem fund, we're planning to do a bunch of those kind of deals, right? Where we tell these guys, hey, come over to Polkadot, we write you a check, right? But it's going to be conditional on you moving over to Polkadot. And we can do this with like different sizes. We can do this with like, whatever, let's say, like not quite startups, but like established companies that have traction, that have users, right, that have a brand recognition. And we can do it with like very big conglomerates that are, huge, that are looking for a new home within the Web3 space and that are still considering where to go. Obviously, we want them to come to Polkadot. We believe from a fundamentals perspective, it's the place that they should be. And we're going to try to facilitate it. All right, I'm going to break here and just open it up for questions. Ask me anything about funding, ask me anything about why Polkadot. Yeah, we have a microphone maybe going around.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about like, where do you see Polkadot in 5 years, from your opinion?
Yeah, so Polkadot is going to be huge. As I said at the beginning, like I think it's the contrarian trait of this cycle. Polkadot is an extremely scalable architecture, right? I mean, nowadays everyone is talking about rollups on Ethereum. Everyone's building an L2 on Ethereum, right? I mean, Polkadot had, like Gavin, when he started Polkadot, he had the original idea of these rollups, right? I mean, as you probably know, Gavin is the former CTO of Ethereum, right? He wrote the yellow paper of Ethereum, right? And worked with Vitalik getting this off the ground. So it's just like a bit of a branding thing. On Ethereum, we're talking about these rollups. On Polkadot, these are essentially parachains, right? They're independent chains, but they're rolling their proofs onto the relay chain. For Ethereum, this kind of happened now, right? Like that all the L2s are like rolling back into the main chain because, they have to do that because of scalability issues. But for Polkadot, that was the plan right from the beginning, right? That was the idea, right? That's why he, Gavin started this. Right from the beginning, it's been proof of stake. I mean, that's one thing, so they didn't have to do the transition. But right from the beginning, it was also like a fully sharded, heterogeneous chain. Heterogeneous means that you don't have to roll up everything onto the main chain, but that you can have sort of certain regions, so to speak, that roll back onto the main chain. But I think your question wasn't so much about like the past, but more about the future. So why do I bring this up, right? I think there are still so many blockchain use cases that we don't know of yet. It's not clear where this is going, right? But I think 3 things I can be very sure of that they will be needed in the future as well. And those are security, decentralization, and scalability, right? This is the famous blockchain trilemma. And this concept has also been popularized by Vitalik, but I think Polkadot has the best answer to it. Much better than Ethereum, and also definitely much better than the likes of Solana. So let's talk a bit through them, right? Security is, has to be number one, right? Like nobody wants to have build a protocol that ultimately gets hacked, is subject to a 51% attack, go into bridge hacks, right? Where suddenly $100 million in liquidity are just siphoned off by a hacker. That's obviously the death of any protocol. So, if you don't take security seriously from day one, then, what are you doing, right? Decentralization is sort of the second part, right? Because yes, of course, you can do something very decentralized. You can do something very centralized, but then why are you even trying to do a blockchain? Of course, if you're centralized, you're always going to be faster. But then, why not use AWS, right? There's, if you don't care about decentralization, and I'm not saying everybody has to care about decentralization all the time. Oftentimes you don't have to care about it. It doesn't really matter for many applications. But for those applications where it does matter, right, that should be the focus point. And then there's scalability, right? Because yes, it's a trilemma. So when you want to optimize for scalability, right, then traditionally, and also in the Ethereum space, the other two variables have been compromised, right? This roll-up idea or the Parachain idea, which are kind of the same things, allow you to scale, right? And without compromising on the two others. So that's really the powerful concept here. So, what does it mean for the future, right? I think these three things, yes, they sound a bit abstract and maybe not that sexy, but that's really what's going to drive the future adoption. For the likes of Solana, whatever. You just need one big hack, which might well happen. You need another situation where the validators grind to a halt and stop producing blocks. That's kind of the end of it, and that's very possible. So that's why Polkadot has this security first mindset, which I really like. And the things that are going to get built on it, we'll see. But these are things that we fundamentally need.